I remember growing up in my little small town and dreaming of a future for myself. And one of the things that I would imagine is that one day I would run away and become the woman that I am. And I would just reappear, just show up, come right back to where I grew up. And my parents would have to accept me because I was obviously a woman. But that was a fantasy. And my reality was much different. When I came out to my father, he told me that he never wanted to see me the way that I am now. And that was a reality that I really struggled with. And because of some recent events, I had to deal with going back and interacting with a family that had essentially abandoned me. And in this video, we're going to discuss a film about a woman who goes on a very similar journey. A woman who is disowned by her family for being transgender, who has to return to perform her daughter's duty. Monica is a 2022 movie starring Trace Lysette. In this film, a transgender woman named Monica returns home after being disowned by her family in order to take care of her ailing mother. So I found out about this film on Instagram, and I have always really loved Trace Lysette. I know that she has been controversial here and there, but I'm always rooting for her. And it's been really exciting to see her do new roles. I was really excited about her role in Hustlers, and I just was really happy to see her in a film like this where she is the lead. And I know that she was very particularly invested in presenting a different narrative than the narrative that is commonly portrayed of transgender women. And another reason why I was particularly interested in this film was because of some events that have happened recently in my life. Now, when this movie came out, I was really struggling to find screenings of it around the city. I just wasn't able to get to them, and I was really kind of depressed that I was going to miss this film. But then I found it on Amazon, and I put it on a back burner for quite some time, and I had some other projects that I was working on. And right before I was about ready to jump on it, I found out that my mother had passed away. And my mom and I were close, but we were distant because of the way that my father essentially chose to disown me. My mom and I got along. My mom knew that I was trans before I knew that I was trans, right? Like when I came out to her the first time around, she was like, I'm pretty sure it's not just that. She knew. And it's so funny thinking about it because I grew up in a very religious household. And so I spent a lot of my childhood hiding that I was transgender, but my mom saw through it, and my mom always made me feel really warm about it. My father, on the other hand, always made me feel terrible about being transgender, and because of that, I was pretty distant from her. And I regret that. I really, 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 really regret that. And I have really struggled with figuring out how to reconnect with my family at this particular phase of my life. I had to take care of all of my mother's arrangements, which I have never expected to do. I thought that our family had it a bit more than we actually did, and it turned out that I was the most successful person in the family, so I was the one who had to pay for everything. And it was really interesting to interact with my family who I haven't seen for a really, really long time. And I had to interact with people who were seeing me as I am now. And so this movie became even more interesting to me in processing my mother's passing away. And so I really wanted to jump on to do this video. And if there's one thing I knew about my mother, I knew that she would really appreciate knowing that I was busy, and she wouldn't want for me to stop being productive because of her. So I really have appreciated making these videos, and I like to think that my mom is up there cheering me on as I do it. And I just wanted to have a conversation about this film because I had some thoughts about this movie. I had some pointed thoughts, which we will definitely get to. But before we get into that, let's go over the plot of the film. As you guys know, I cannot do a review without going over the plot. So we will be telling the entire plot of the film Monica, and that will, of course, include spoilers. So if you're a person who doesn't like spoilers, you can always check where the chapters are and skip ahead so that you are able to get a review of the film without the plot. But I feel that a lot of times it's important for me to establish the plot before getting to my review. So here we go. Monica is a woman going through it. She's in the midst of a breakup. She is a cam girl and also a massage therapist, and she is clearly very unhappy with her monotonous life. Out of the blue, she gets a call from her sister-in-law, Lauren, who for some reason was able to find her number. At this point in the film, we don't really understand why, but Monica is estranged from her family. So Lauren had to some way, somehow find her phone number to contact her and tell her that her mother is very ill. Monica goes on a little bit of a road trip to her mother's home, and when she gets there, she notices that she is bedridden. She goes to say hello to her mother, but her mother doesn't recognize her at all, and Lauren explains that Monica is there to help. Late at night in another room, Monica decides to do some cam work, but she is interrupted by her mother screaming, "Mama, Mama," from the other room. It's established when she gets to her mother's home that her grandmother passed away and that her mom is really struggling with that. And I have to say, this was a part of the film where I actually cried because I have quite literally been doing just this these past couple of months, occasionally just screaming out for my mom in a way that I haven't since I was a child. So I actually really appreciated this performance because it just touched a part of me. Anyway, Monica goes and helps her and puts her back into bed. The next day, her brother Paul shows up, and Paul also doesn't recognize her. In fact, he says that if he didn't know that she was who she was, he would not have recognized her. It's clear that these siblings have not seen each other for a very long time, and there's a little bit of an unknown tension between them. So at this point, we don't really know what's wrong with Monica's mother, but they go to the hospital, and it's established that she has a brain tumor. And that day at the hospital, they find out that it's only getting progressively worse. At the very start of this film, it's established that Monica is going through a breakup, and she does the thing that a lot of us have done before, where she calls her ex and, gives him the what how about how he's the most terrible person in the world. And Monica's clearly feeling really lonely, and so she goes on the internet and tries to find a man to spend some time with, and she makes a date with him at the local bar. She goes to the local bar, waits there for hours and hours and hours. Meanwhile, truckers are hitting on her and things like that while she's sitting there, and the guy doesn't show up. So after waiting for a bit, she decides to go with one of the truckers and has sex in his truck bed. Monica is not having a good night, and the night ends in a perfect and very poetic way, with her car breaking down on her way back to her mother's house. When she gets home, it's clear that she's had an incredibly miserable night, so she decides to go upstairs and climb in bed with her mother and lay next to her in a way that was clearly very familiar to her from childhood. Mind you, at this point, Monica's mother still hasn't recognized her, and the next morning when her mother wakes up, she looks at Monica and says nothing. Monica is very clearly having a hard time with all of this, and she basically has hit her limit. She decides to pack up her things and she starts to head back to where she's from. Her brother tries to stop her, but for reasons that we still don't know, there's still a lot of tension there, and she decides to push ahead and leave anyway. She goes to pick up her car from the mechanic, and on her way back to where she's from, she decides to turn around and go right back to her mother's house. When Monica gets back, she has a conversation with Paul, and in that conversation, it's revealed that Monica is transgender, and that when she was a child, Monica's mother drove her to the bus station and said to her, essentially, "I can no longer be your mother," and told her to basically go and live in the city far away from her. And so a lot of the tension that Monica feels is because she hasn't seen her mother since that day. And now she's coming back and she's seeing her mother in a vulnerable state. And it's just a lot for her to handle. Later that day, Monica and her mother have a beautifying routine. They get her zhuzhed up to go out to the hair salon to get her hair done. And it's, I guess, a moment of them connecting in a more intimate way. And later that night, Monica is bathing her mother. And it's at that point where her mother gets a really close look at her and realizes that she is her former son. And even though there's no explicit conversation about it, it's understood that she finally recognizes her. And there's a new closeness between all of them. Now, Paul has 2 children, and in the early part of the film, Monica is having a conversation with Paul about the children and how much the little boy reminds her of Paul. And Paul says, well, I actually thought that he reminded me more of you, basically insinuating that the child is a little bit effeminate, and in that way they are quite similar. And Monica very clearly sort of sees a part of her in this child, and so she decides to become closer to him. Throughout the film, Paul's son Baron is practicing the Star-Spangled Banner. He has a performance coming up at school, and Monica decides to cheer him on by giving him a little bit of a pep talk. I believe she says, you better go slay that stage or something. And the film ends with him performing his rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner and all of the family looking on at the child fondly. Yep, that's how it ends. So, as you can piece together, I definitely have some thoughts about this film. And if you follow these videos, you know that this was indeed the quickest summary I've ever done. And I believe this movie was around 2 hours. And that's going to lead into my review. So let's get into my thoughts about this film, Monica. So I have to say that I was really excited about this film because I absolutely love Trace Lysette. I think that she is absolutely gorgeous. I really loved her in every project that I've seen her in. And I just really think that it's great that she was in this. Like, I was really surprised to see that this was a feature-length film going to festivals and things, and she was a star. I've seen her on social media for years talk about trans representation and wanting to be in projects like this. So I was really, really happy to see that she was in this and apparently was a really huge part of it. But when I looked up reviews of the film, I have to say I was met with a lot of really negative reviews. And most of them mentioned that the film was a little bit of a slog. And they mentioned that the way it is shot is in an artistic way that isn't necessarily lending itself to the movie being legible. And I guess these reviews really surprised me because on Amazon, it's got a 4 out of 5 star rating. Now, to be fair, I don't think that this is a film that a lot of people know about. I have definitely not heard a lot of people talk about it. It's just a film that I was really excited to see. So I don't know if maybe there weren't very many people who rated it on Amazon at all, but all I know is that I had high expectations for this film, and I have to be honest with you and say I did find that the reviews were pretty accurate. I thought that the style of this movie kind of sabotaged the premise of the movie because it was so distracting that I have to be honest, it just took away from a lot of things. And the way that it's shot, this entire film is in standard definition. And I found myself really wanting to know what was on this side of the screen. It was just shot in a way where I didn't feel like they really utilized standard definition in the way that they could have or should have. And it just felt a little bit like they almost took widescreen footage and superficially made it into standard definition. Because the way the shots were planned just really truly didn't lend itself to good storytelling. There was a lot of stationary camera throughout the film, basically where they would put the camera in one portion of the room and characters would traverse across it, right? And that can work really, really well. And I'm a huge fan of stationary cameras and the layered sort of way that you can tell a story with that. But there were a lot of utilizations of a stationary camera that truly didn't feel like it actually added anything. It felt like more of a stylistic choice. Because generally when you have a stationary camera like that, you want for the foreground and the background to be a central part of telling the story. You want to feel like there are things that are happening in this shot that make you having this one steady shot at this one particular angle very useful and adding to the storytelling, right? Like maybe there's something in the foreground that is being affected by the things that are happening in the background. Maybe the character in the background meant to go grab the thing that was in the foreground but never made it, right? Like that's the way that you utilize a stationary camera. And I just found that in so many situations, it was just kind of there to be there. And there were a lot of things that happened off camera that I guess they used as sort of a stylistic thing, like when she's doing the cam work and things, they kind of use the steady camera in a way to sort of, you can see. And I think actually in that particular scene, I think that actually kind of worked because I kind of enjoyed the fact that it was like, this thing she might not have felt like she should be doing, because it definitely had that vibe. And then, it's like you're in your parents' house and your parent interrupts you, right? Like I think maybe it worked there, but there were just a lot of areas where it didn't really work. And I found that to be so distracting. And a lot of the way that the movie is shot is also spending a lot of time accentuating how beautiful Trace Lysette is. And I hope this doesn't sound a certain way, but Trace Lysette is absolutely gorgeous, right? She is drop dead, 10s across the board, absolutely gorgeous. But there were moments where I felt a little bit like, how is this adding to the story, right? Like, why are we seeing her tan? Why do we need to see her in the car every time she drives anywhere? Why are there so many shots of her in profile? There were so many shots that were of her in profile. It was almost most of the shots that she was in. Was that something that Trace Lysette wanted? Is that a stylistic choice by the director? I don't really know. But all I know is that I didn't feel like it really added much to the story. Like I said, I think this film is like 2 hours long. There's not a lot that happens. It is a slice of life film that I think is stylistically cool. I enjoy a good slice of life, but I'm frustrated by the fact that this film had a really great and interesting premise. And because I've personally gone through loss recently and I've had to deal with, interacting with family who hasn't seen me and, decades at this point, who only remember me as a child, I had so many instances of people seeing me now and being very surprised and the weird and interesting things that added to that, right? It just didn't really do what I thought it was going to do or what I really wanted it to do, right? Like there are so many great conversations to be had about how transgender people return to their families of origin that have rejected them, right? Why is it that as a child, Monica was kicked out of her house, but they've got this little fey child, in the other room who is seemingly embraced by his grandmother, right? Like, why is it that went that way? Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, a mother deciding to kick her child out because she's transgender is a really intense thing. And you had no sense that her mother was an ignorant person or had a lot of hate in her heart that for whatever reason she would have changed. Like, I wanted to know, how did this old woman shift her views? Right? I also wanted to know how those views impacted her son. The only thing we really heard from Paul was that he wanted to run away and live with her in the city or whatever, because I guess living back there wasn't that great. But like, there are just so many conversations that I felt weren't had. And this film, being a slice of life, didn't really allow us to get those really great juicy details that would have made this a better film, right? I want to know what that looked like for her as a kid. And I understand, and I don't know if this is the case, but I understand Trace Lysette's desire to be portrayed a certain way. I understand her desire not to be seen as just the sex worker who couldn't be a fully fledged trans woman beyond being a stereotype. Like I understand that, and I understand why that is such a focus and goal of hers. But this is a really interesting story for me because I don't know whether or not this is the case, but I got the impression that because of how Trace Lysette wanted to be portrayed, we didn't get some of the uncomfortable aspects of this narrative that we could have probably gotten. I felt like there was writing that just really needed to be fleshed out better. Writing that really needed to just make these characters feel more real, And of course, you're not gonna have all of the intense conversations. There's a scene where Lauren is looking at her wedding photos with Monica, and Lauren mentions that she's wearing her mother's dress. I know as a trans woman how that would probably hurt hearing, right? You're her daughter, but you'll never be seen that way. So when she wanted to give her dress to someone, she didn't even think of you, right? It was her son's wife, right? And not that that's not how things sometimes go, but it's pretty standard that the mom would give her daughter her dress, right? And I guess it's just, I like stuff like that, but I also wanted more of it. And there's a way I feel like you could do it too. Like you don't need it to be this super on the nose, let's go ABC 1, 2, 3, let's see her pre-transition. We don't need to do all of that, but there were so many missed opportunities, I think, because of the way that I think Trace Lysette wanted to come off in this film. I could be wrong about that. I could be totally wrong about that, but that's what I'm piecing together. My biggest thing is I just felt like the way this was written, the way that this was filmed, it really sabotaged great source material. And the end was so unceremonious, right? The kid performs, and I guess we're supposed to sort of see that, that little kid maybe represents a new generation of children who aren't going to be treated the way that she was treated. And I think that is so cool and so great, but I also just wanted to see more. I wanted a different ending. I wanted a better ending. I wanted an ending that made me feel something. Because that's another thing. After all of this, after watching all of this, I don't feel that invested in these characters. That was the biggest thing I left with. I want the kid to sing well, or, I want the mom to survive or whatever. But I don't know. I didn't really feel, why should I care? Especially after I learned that she deserted her child. Why should I care what happened to this woman? I need to understand that. Of course, I understand that things don't often happen in these teachable, interesting story moments, right? So maybe that wasn't the overall goal of this, right? But I guess I just think to myself that this just could have been so good. And I'm kind of heartbroken that it wasn't. So I wanted to look into this film a bit more to understand a bit more about where it came from and who was behind it, how it was received, what she said in interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to now start having a conversation about the production and all of the themes and such within this film and how the director and various people felt about it. Let's get into it. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I definitely have started to do things a bit differently around here. Usually I would sit down, write an entire script of both my review and all the other stuff I want to talk about. And I would just sit down in one sitting and film that. But now what you get more often is I will film my raw thoughts immediately after I watched it. I think the thing I appreciate about the way that these videos have been going is that the script is kind of a live script, right? I'm still holding really closely on to my criticism, but there are some things about this film that I think are worth discussing and examining and exploring. Okay, so to my utter surprise, this film is actually performing decently well. Let's see. This film had a pretty limited release and only made just shy of $200,000, which I guess is pretty decent for a production of its size. It has a 84% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes with an audience rating of 98%. Metacritic gives Monica a critic review score of 74, and on IMDb it sits at a 6.2 rating. And in general, there's a lot of very positive buzz about this film. In fact, I'm starting to feel a little bit like I am gonna be some of the only semi-prominent negative criticism of the movie. So, okay, one of my major questions about this film was how involved was Trace Lysette exactly? Because from the very little that I knew about Trace Lysette before watching this film, I definitely felt like Monica was her self-insert character, right? Like, she is very similar to Monica, and I wondered if that was intentional, if that was the director flattering Trace Lysette as an actress. And so I really wondered how much of this film was shifted around to cater to Trace Lysette. Because one of my passing criticisms was I felt like a lot of the way they shot it was shot in a way to specifically be flattering to her. There's so many shots of her body, so many shots of her beauty, and as I have said many times and will continue to say and enjoy saying, she is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. So it's not like I don't like seeing it. It's just, for me, it didn't necessarily add to the story. But as it turns out, it seems like a lot of the way that Monica is portrayed is directly because of the way that the director wanted to portray a transgender character. And it also turns out that Monica being so similar to Trace Lysette is more of an example of just really, really good casting. So this is a film directed and co-written by Andrea Polero. Orlando Tirado is the other writer. Polero is a screenwriter and director who was originally born in Italy. He's been in America since he was 17 years old, and he's also from my alma mater, Cal Arts, which I thought was really funny because for me, it sort of explained some of the style of the film, which we'll get into later. Apparently, Polero based the character Monica on one of his personal friends who was transgender, and that is why Monica is a transgender woman and why he was so focused on having a transgender woman play this role. Originally, Monica's character was a little bit older than what she is portrayed in the film, but there are otherwise a lot of similarities between Monica and Trace Lysette. This film was shot on location in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Polero mentioned that one of the reasons why he wanted to shoot in such a mundane, conservative area is because he wanted to show a stark contrast between that life and the life in the city that Monica lives, which is obviously a bit flashier and a bit faster. Lysette actually grew up 10 minutes away in Dayton, Ohio. Like Monica, she also experienced rejection from her mother. And when she struggled in her hometown, she decided to run away to New York City, where she would eventually join the ballroom scene and start doing sex work. And she says that she only really did sex work after several failed attempts at working a normal job. She apparently had a job at Bloomingdale's and she lost the job because she wanted to use the women's restroom. And so she did do some sex work. And while she was doing that sex work, she wanted to slowly but surely pull herself out of that and be in a better situation. She decided that one of the ways that she would do that was to be stealth in her 20s. Now, those of you guys who follow my channel know that I was also somebody who was stealth in her 20s. And stealth, for those of you guys who may not understand, is essentially living in a way where you don't inform people that you're transgender. And this is generally done in order to get better opportunity. And I think it's important to mention that I believe that Trace Lysette and I are sort of close in age. And when we were coming up, there were a lot less protections for transgender employees. So there was definitely sort of this sense that if you were going to be transgender, You need it to be a certain way. You need it to pass and, commit to all of these extremes. It wasn't necessarily this desire to mislead people. It was simply survival. Trace Lysette is post-op, and while she was stealth, she worked at a strip club that catered to heterosexual men for 8 years. And if you've seen Hustlers, you already know that her character is essentially an homage to that time in her life. As she was getting out of sex work, she started doing acting, and even in the very beginning of her acting career, she was stealth. In fact, one of her first gigs was on Law and Order, and at the time, she was stealth. In an interview with The Advocate, she says, "I hadn't seen another trans woman in a non-trans role on TV before. It was uncharted territory for me, and I remember being a nervous wreck on set, hoping that no one would clock me as transgender." She wouldn't actually start being out as a transgender actress until she started seeing the success of one of her personal friends, Laverne Cox. At the time, Laverne Cox was playing a major role in the TV show Orange is the New Black, and she started to see through her that you could be an out transgender actress and find success. She started going to inclusive acting classes where she was finally able to use some of her previous strife as fuel for her acting career. Over the years, Lysette has repaired a lot of her relationship with her mother, choosing to believe that her mom simply did the best that she could at the time. And I'm sort of getting there with my dad. I've had to sort of look back and realize that my father didn't really know how to raise a child like me, right? Like, he just wasn't prepared, and he did what he thought was best. And what he thought was best was religion. And it was incredibly harmful to me. It is one of the main reasons why we were not close and are not close. But I have, with age, started to accept that, your parents are not this paradigm of knowledge and information. They're human beings just like you are. And a lot of the times, parents don't know everything. And I've learned to be a little bit more forgiving. But anyway, Trace Lysette is indeed pretty similar to Monica, and it turns out that that is, again, not because of the film necessarily catering to her, though they did change certain aspects of the film to fit her a bit more. It turns out that the character already grew up in Ohio, already had a lot of the history in the character that was similar to that of Trace Lysette's story, and it just sort of turned out that way. However, like I said, the way that Monica was portrayed was a very deliberate decision by the director. Pallero wanted to stray away from typical narratives of how transgender people are portrayed in film. He didn't want to show a story of a transition and all of the hard and dangerous things that come along with it. He wanted to tell the story of a transgender woman who was, in his personal description, 100% a woman, meaning she's post-op. She is on, in many people's definition, the other side of transition, and her being transgender is simply part of the story. He wanted to tell, as he states, a story about a woman who happens to be transgender, as opposed to a story about a transgender woman. And a lot of the director's desires line up perfectly with Trace Lysette, who is a person who identifies herself as a transsexual. Now, there's a lot of debate about that term, about transsexual, and this is one of the areas where Trace Lysette has caught some flack from people about her personal feelings about this. I'm going to go back and repeat that, Trace Lysette and I are of a similar era. And so I understand a lot of why she clings on to transsexual as a definition. It comes from a time where people had to, as we're describing self and things like that, cling to these incredibly binary ways of being and thinking. And I think that it's a description of her that I at least understand immediately. And I think that she is completely entitled to feel the way that she does about her own gender. Now, of course, there are conversations to unpack about being 100% a woman and what other people may consider to be the completion of a transition, right? But when I was thinking about this, I realized that it's very true that I haven't seen very many films about transgender people or starring transgender people where the transgender woman is post-op and the physical medical transition isn't a major part of the narrative. So in so many ways, yes, this was indeed a different representation of a transgender woman that a lot of us haven't really seen. When discussing how Monica is portrayed, she told the Golden Globe Awards, "There's no other film that examines the journey of someone who is absolutely 100% a woman, who respects herself, who feels at peace in herself, who behaves as she behaves and doesn't have the big revelation moment of, oh, this is what happens when you change and this is how people accept you." Polero also said this on the subject. "It's not a transition story, which is usually the case, I must say, with most of the films and stories I have experienced with transgender characters at their center. There's a danger to that, because I think the mainstream audience is then brought to understand and experience these characters just within those parameters. It's a film that I hope allows spectators to use Monica as a vehicle to see themselves reflected onto this character, onto the story, and onto these dynamics, and hopefully understand themselves better through her, because that's the real catharsis that I look for in film, and I look for in art in general, and that I hope to be able to give an audience." So I guess this is one of the many areas where I felt that my feelings sort of shifted. On one hand, Monica is indeed an incredibly intimate and realistic portrayal of a transgender woman as she currently is. And there's something to be said about a depiction of a transgender woman that doesn't explicitly focus on all the bad stuff, all of the messiness of transition, and simply celebrates a transgender woman as a fully realized person who isn't struggling, at least with gender. Monica is indeed a fully realized character who has issues outside of being transgender, and in a way that is indeed incredibly refreshing. On the other hand, her being transgender is an incredibly large part of the film, right? Like, if we were to extract her being transgender from this movie completely, it would just be a film about an estranged daughter who goes and visits her mother to take care of her. It would be an incredibly different film. In addition to that, she's not really an atypical portrayal of a transgender woman. Yes, she's post-op. Yes, we see that she is more than just a sex worker, right? But she is still a sex worker. This is yet another example of a transgender woman not really having a job outside of sex work. And this was one of these areas where I found myself asking, was this character originally a sex worker, or did they change the character to be a sex worker because of Trace Lysette's history with sex work? Now, to be completely clear, I think sex work is work, and sex work is something that a lot of transgender women do. I definitely think it's realistic to portray somebody who was disowned by her family as having a sex work history. But when we see her, she's still currently a sex worker. We don't know how old she is exactly. She's at least 30, we'll just say that. And she's still doing sex work. And I guess for me, when I think about transgender representation, that's just another representation of trans women only being able to do sex work. And I honestly found myself asking, did Polero write Monica as a sex worker? Not that there would be anything wrong with that, but I know some transgender women who have never done sex work, who live very, very interesting lives, right? Like, one of my friends is a elementary school teacher, and she lives in stealth. She's been in stealth forever. She's married. Obviously her husband knows, but she is stealth to the rest of the world. And especially in a time like right now, when all of this stuff is coming out against teachers, it's been really interesting to sort of watch her. She actually reached out to me to thank me for making YouTube content, because she feels like she is in so many ways not speaking up, but she feels like she can't speak up because she is stealth and she has to be for her survival. And I don't know, to me, that kind of story is a really interesting story. The story of Trace Lysette being stealth is a very interesting story to me. And I think that, again, it's realistic. It's still valid. Sex work is work. I'm not trying to make the argument that, you know, she was a school teacher, she'd be better than a sex worker. I'm just saying, I haven't seen The School Teacher. I can list trans sex worker characters because that is indeed the box that we're often painted with. So it was interesting to listen to them talk about this being an atypical representation of a transgender woman, because in a lot of ways it is an intimate, you know, very real portrayal of a transgender woman. But this transgender woman in this universe is still a sex worker. And I think that there's something to be said about the lack of imagination beyond that. Like, to me, the thing that's interesting is I've seen the way that employment discrimination has shifted when it comes to transgender women, right? When I was younger, there was a lack of discrimination laws. You had to be stealth in order to get a job or like not transition, right? And so it was very, very different. The times were very, very different. Nowadays, at least in Los Angeles, I can go to Starbucks or Target or any place where an entry-level employee can get hired, and I see transgender people working these jobs. And it's so cool because back in the day when I was applying for work, I would literally get laughed out of the business, right? Like, there were so many times where as a teenager, I tried to apply for work, but I couldn't because I was trans, right? And so it's been really cool to see a shift in how transgender people can work. And so I guess that makes it very interesting to me that with things being so different, she was still in 2023 portrayed as just a sex worker, because I think that portrayal might have made more sense back in the day. But there are so many interesting conversations, in my opinion, to be had about transgender women who are working right now in the workforce in a way they weren't the past 20 years, right? Like, transgender women have always been in the workforce, but I see so many more people applying to jobs as transgender women, right? And so that's such a huge thing for me in terms of like a cultural shift that I've seen. And it's interesting to see that that's not reflected in this film. But, you know, all of my criticism aside, I'm also going to acknowledge again that this is still a atypical portrayal of a transgender woman, and I did appreciate it for what it is. This film actually also broke a record at the Venice Film Festival. It was the first film ever screened at the Venice Film Festival that had a transgender lead. And apparently Trace Lysette received an 11-minute encore. And when I heard that, it just really warmed my heart. I was so happy to hear that she had come so far. And she mentions in an interview that in that moment, she thought back to the sex worker that she used to be, and she couldn't believe that she had made it there, right? Like I said, the research that I've done for this video has really made me appreciate Trace Lysette. And I think that our stories are so similar in so many ways. And so it's so cool to see her be where she is. And I'm gonna be really honest with you guys. I low-key, I'm gonna be looking into taking some acting classes now, because reading about her story has been really just influential to me. I used to be an actor. I was an actor all through high school. I was a thespian, and I stopped doing it because I didn't really think I could as a transgender woman. And I'm more recently seeing, I believe Act Now LA has like transgender acting classes and things like that. So, you know, a lot of this is kind of encouraging me to, you know, dip my toes in and, you know, see what we can do out here in Los Angeles. But I think that, like, at bare minimum, I want to like celebrate this film for what it is, because it is in so many ways breaking records and blazing trails. And I'm so excited to sort of see where this goes. But let's talk about one of the things that I had the most issues with this film, because there was apparently a lot of method to the madness when it came to the way that this movie was shot. In an interview with Movable Fest, he had this to say about his particular approach to film. He says he likes to create a type of cinema that doesn't tell you what to think and feel, but actually protects the mystery of the characters and what they choose to reveal or keep from the audience. His style doesn't rely on exposition, but capitalizes on the nonverbal, which allows the spectator to connect the dots themselves. And when I read that, I was like, he definitely went to CalArts, because I feel like I saw so many films at CalArts that were basically like that. I was in the character animation department, which is part of the film school. So I did have quite a few film classes and saw quite a few short films at school. And this just reminded me so much of that. It just reminded me so much of those specific types of film. So like I said, this film was filmed entirely in standard definition, and apparently Pallero wanted to film it that way in order to create a sense of claustrophobia. And the way that he likes to portray characters is he slowly but surely reveals them as the film goes on. So in the very beginning of the film, we are almost in an extreme close-up to Monica's face. And as the story goes on, as it is revealed, we see more and more and more and more and more of her. So hearing that explanation, I definitely started to understand why there were so many close shots of Monica, why that was there. And, you know, this is one of those things, yeah, when I read about it, I thought of it, and it did give me, I guess you could say, a little bit of an appreciation for it. I definitely think that his way of going about filming this allows you to establish a very intimate relationship with the subject. And I definitely think that it's effective in giving you the impression that you are in this person's thoughts. You are feeling this person's internal feelings. And I get it. I understand it. I totally get where he's coming from. But for me, it still didn't end up being like an effective storytelling technique. I get the style. I really do. He doesn't really want exposition. This is a slice of life. You are with the subject for a set period of time, and you are really only seeing what they see. And I get it, I understand it, but for me, there's a way to do exposition without doing like literal exposition. And there were still so many things about the relationship between these people and the things that were unsaid that I really wanted to explore. And I don't know, maybe it's because I went into this film with certain feelings, obviously because of recent events or something, but I did sort of feel let down by this film, by how surface level it all was. And I really feel like when you're talking about returning to your childhood home, there are just so many things in the vicinity that could remind her of the past, that could tell stories of how they got there and could have shown more. And I get the show not tell thing. I totally get it. But I still felt like there were just so many conversations that were missed out. And the end was so unceremonious. You didn't feel at all like you needed to be there for that, frankly. Like, I think that this is a film that does a really good job at portraying a trans woman, but not a great job at portraying a good story. We spend so much of the film in these really intimate moments with Monica. And yes, they are beautiful. And yes, she is absolutely beautiful. But when you looked back at it all, it just all felt so inconsequential at the end of the day. It felt so like, okay, you know, whatever. You know, I didn't really feel connected to this character. I felt like we had an intimate relationship, but I didn't fully understand a lot of why things were the way they were. There were some areas where I felt like it was really effective. I really enjoy the scene where she crawls into bed with her mom, because that's the sort of shit you would do, right? When you're around your mother, you know, even if you've had strife, there's this automatic thing that you have if you've ever had a loving relationship with your mom. And that for me was a great example of telling a lot of story without showing much. But there were just so many other unexplored things. And again, I don't know if my feelings are being polluted by my preconceived notion of what this film was going to be, but I definitely left this film feeling kind of underwhelmed with how it all turned out. So should you watch this movie? I think if you're intrigued by the movie from this video, you should definitely go check it out. I think if you are a Trace Lysette fan, you should definitely go check it out. I think if you are a cinemaphile and you want to like sort of see an artistic portrayal of a transgender woman, I definitely think it's worth a view. I think it's an interesting movie to study for sure. I think with some of the things in mind that I talked about with, you know, storytelling and stationary shots, it would be an interesting film to analyze as a student, I think. I thought that Patricia Clarkson, who plays the mother, was really, 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 really good in this movie. Everyone else was okay, frankly, but Patricia Clarkson is great in this film. If you're a Patricia Clarkson fan, I would say that's another reason to watch this film. I definitely think it has a lot of artistic merit, but I ultimately felt that it was a slog. This is a film that is an hour and 53 minutes, and there's not a lot of story that happens. There really, really isn't. And I just sort of felt a little bit let down because I was pretty excited for what I thought this was going to be. But again, maybe my thoughts, maybe my preconceived notions are clouding my judgment here. But anyway, that's how I felt about the film. If you have seen the movie, I would love to know what you have to say. Please give me your thoughts in the comment box below. And on that note, I want you to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.